Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. During this video, I'll be showing you how you can create your own inspect mechanism in Unity. So the final result of this video is going to be looking kind of like this. So as you can see, I'm able to rotate this object uh, using my mouse. So whenever I press the right click of my mouse, I'm able to rotate it. When I release it, you can see that it stops. And regardless of how this object is rotated, I'm able to rotate it as the user would expect. And if the, let's say, the camera were to move, it will still work the same way. So you can see that moving left and right, the object rotates as the user would expect. So it's based on where the camera is and gives a smooth result to the user. So let's have a look at how this works. First of all, you're going to need an object to rotate, and the object that you want to be rotating and inspecting, basically I just set a tag inspectable, so you don't rotate everything in your scene. For example, you don't want to be rotating this entire wall, you want to be rotating things that would make sense. And the next we have the camera, which has the actual functionality in it. You can have the functionality in the script anywhere you like. I just chose to include it onto the camera because it's simpler, and I'll show you why. So this is the script. It's about 50 lines of code, pretty small script, and this is all you need. So first we're going to be discussing the actual variables. We are going to need 5 variables. One is the camera, then we have the transform of the object we're going to be inspecting. Then we have 2 variables that are responsible for gathering the input of the user for the X and Y based on the movement of that user, uh, movement of the mouse. So if you're going to be moving left and right, the change of that movement is going to be stored here as a float. We're going to be using this number to be modifying the rotation of the object, and same for the Y. If the user is moving up and down their mouse, we're going to be storing the change of that movement in here. And then lastly, we have the rotate speed, which is basically just how fast should the object be rotating. And in this start function, we're going to be getting the camera component from our game object and the actual magic that's happening in the update function. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is first checking if the left mouse button is pressed, and this is basically choosing the object that you want to be rotating. So when you're hovering over, let's say in my case the cube in my scene, if I were to press left click, I want to be selecting that to be inspected, and I want to be rotating that. So in order to select that, we're going to be using something called a raycast. So if you're not sure what a raycast is, you should have a look at it, because it's a pretty complicated thing to comprehend and explain in one video. But basically, what we're doing here is we're calling a function and passing in the input mouse position, so the position of the mouse on your screen, and then also passing in an empty raycast here, which will basically contain information about something that I'm going to be discussing right now. So this is the actual function, pretty small function. So what we're going to be doing here is first creating a ray. So a ray is basically a line. You can think of it as a line, an infinite line, and we're going to be creating a line from the actual camera to the point of the mouse position. So you can think of it as an infinite line starting from your camera towards the position of the mouse. So if I were to go back to my scene, we're going to be shooting basically a ray from the camera, so where the camera is, towards where I'm pressing. So in this case, when I'm pressing towards this, it's going to be creating an infinite line towards that. So that is in essence what we're doing here, and we're going to be returning true if we actually hit something. If we haven't hit something, we're going to be returning false. And in addition, we're going to be using this ray hit thing that we have passed in, which was initially empty. In case that it does hit something, this variable is going to be containing some information about the thing that we have hit. So in our case, going to be the cube, for example. And we're going to be using this ray hit to determine whether the object that we have hit has the tag inspectable. So if it's inspectable, we're going to be getting its transform and storing it into the variable that we have created above. So you can see, getting again from the ray hit the transform of the object that we have here. So now we have the transform of the object that we want to be rotating. And okay, so later on we're getting the input from the mouse of the user to our variables, so x and y, and as we're using the input class, getting the get axis function and passing in mouse x and mouse y. So these are basically the change of position of the mouse on the x-axis and on the y. And please note that we're also setting this to minus, because otherwise it would be awkward and inverted and not work as you would expect. And once we have this stored in our variables, we're going to be checking whether the right mouse is pressed, so whether the user wants to be rotating this or not, and also if this is empty or not, because we don't want to be rotating something that is empty. So if both of these are true, we want to be executing this line. So this line could have been contained into one. As you can see, there is only one semicolon, and this is a continuous thing, but I chose to split it up to be easier to explain. And what we're doing here is we're setting the rotation of this transform that we have here to this thing, and we're using the angle axis, which is part of the quaternion class. And if you're not sure what this function is doing, it's basically rotating something, or basically creates a rotation around an axis and rotates it by an amount of degrees or angles. And it accepts two parameters. One is the amount of degrees that you want to be rotating around the axis that you're passing in as the second argument. And there is an example here that you can have a look at it, and there are more examples online if you want to understand more of how the angle axis works. And it basically returns a rotation back to us. We're going to be using it for both x and y axis to create a rotation around a specific axis that we want. So again, first parameter is the amount of degrees that we want to be rotating. So in our case, we want to be rotating the x-axis. So the amount is going to be a float here. So if the user has moved their mouse left and right, we're going to be getting that and multiplying it by the speed, and then passing in the transform up. So what is exactly is the transform up? Remember that we are still in the camera game object, so this is attached to the camera. So this is going to be getting the transform up of this object, which is the camera. And if you're not sure what that is, you can think of it as this green arrow right here. So it's basically an arrow that is pointing upward from this object. So this is the transform up. This green arrow is the transform up. We're going to be using this to be rotating around this axis. So we're going to be rotating this object around the axis of the camera. And this will basically create a system that is independent from how the actual object is rotated, and we're only going to be setting the axis from our camera. And we're doing the same exact thing for the y-axis. So we're going to be passing in first the amount of degrees that we want using the delta rotation y, and also the transform rotation right instead of the up. So the transform right is the red arrow right here. So we're going using these two methods provided for us from the transform class to determine how should we be rotating this object. And lastly, we're also for each time we're multiplying this, lastly multiplying it by the existing rotation of the object we want, because we want to be taking into account the existing rotation of the object. So I know this may sound a bit more complicated, but it's pretty simple once you have a look at this and understand how it works. So I will recommend you having a look at how this works on the background, and I'm sure you'll be able to understand how this works. So one final time, you'll see I'm able to, when moving left to right, be able to rotate as you would expect, and be able to do this regardless of how the camera is pointed towards the object. So if I were to increase it really high, you'll see that the object is still rotated based on the camera and where the camera is at. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video, and if you did, make sure to like this video and subscribe onto the channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next time.